Do you love spy books, movies, and TV? Then the Spybrary podcast is for you.
Hello and welcome to Spybrary episode 256. Today we are bringing you a much requested feature. We're bringing it back, the Dead Drop 5. We ran a survey towards the end of last year, and thank you for the 400 plus of you who responded to our survey, letting us know what you like to hear on the show and what you don't like. Wasn't too much of that, thankfully. Dead Drop 5 is basically our equivalent of Desert Island Disc. This is where we embed the guest behind the wall in the Iron Curtain, and they can request 5 books from their handler, as well as some luxury items. It's a really fun series, and you all said you enjoy it because it helps us on our discovery of, you know, not just reading the classic spy novels, but, you know, stuff that may be off the beaten track. And today's guest certainly took us off the beaten track, let me tell you that. His name is James Stejskal. He's an author, military historian. He spent 35 years with the US Army Special Forces and the CIA, working in interesting places like Africa, Europe, the Balkans, the Near and Far East. Now, he's an author. He is the author of the Snake Eater Chronicles, which is a Cold War military and espionage thriller series, as well as the non-fiction books such as this one of my favorites actually, Special Forces Berlin, Kel surprise, Clandestine Cold War Operations of the U.S. Army's Elite 1956 to 1990, as well as other non-fiction books. And James said, as we kick off the interview, he said, look, I don't want to pick, you know, the famous tried and tested spy novels here, or indeed those from our Spybrarian authors. I want to go a little bit off the beaten track. So I'm pretty sure you'll be scrabbling for your Amazon account or trying to track these books down at your local bookstore when you hear James's suggestion. And he's also given us some luxury items. We also have some fun with that. And we're also hosting an event with James and other authors such as I.S. Berry, Adam Brooks, Dan Fesperman, Simon Conway in DC. It's more of a have a couple of beers and a slice of pizza than anything formal. Come along to that. That's on the 26th of February in DC at Kerwin's on the Wharf. We'd love to see you there. And, you know, if you're a fan of these authors, you know, bring a book along and I'm sure they'll sign them for you. So without further ado, let's go across to James Stejskal and his Dead Drop 5. And welcome back to Spybrary, James Stejskal. James, it's been a while. In fact, the last time I believe you were on Spybrary was episode 149. We're now on episode 256. So long overdue your return back to Spybrary. How are you, sir?
I am doing well. It doesn't seem like that long, but 100 episodes is quite a while.
It is indeed, and you've been prolific with writing books. We were talking about A Question of Time then, which I believe was your first in the Snake Eater Chronicles, and of course I came across your work through Special Forces Berlin on the non-fiction side, which is one of my favorite books on Berlin. We'll touch a little bit more on your work later on and what you've been up to. We're here today, and this is kind of ironic, because Dead Drop 5 is where we ask our guests, you know, have been positioned behind the wall, behind the Iron Curtain. You're allowed to ask your handler for 5 books. You probably were embedded behind the Iron Curtain at some point, Jim.
Well, actually, I just returned from Berlin. I was there in November, and I was visiting a lot of my old haunts. And suffice to say, I love Berlin, and I'll be happy to go back for whatever you task me with.
Fantastic. So before we get into your 5 spy picks, what is it about reading spy thrillers that you really enjoy? And I ask that, James, because obviously you worked in this field. What is the attraction then of going and writing and reading fiction set in espionage?
Oh, that's such a great question. And I don't know that I can give you any one answer, but I think it's all about the atmosphere of being in those places and experiencing what Le Carre and Dayton and all these people put their spies through. A lot of the stuff that they write about, you know, I never experienced, but I've had some really similar chance happenings that always makes it interesting for me. And that's really the reason why I got into the writing business was I like to tell that story. I like to feel it again. And having been there, I think gives me a bit of a leg up if I could only articulate it as well as some of these guys. But yeah, I think it's the atmosphere. Really.
Yeah. What I like about your work is obviously you have that background of being in special forces, so you know that world. You were also in CIA. You've also read Le Carre, Dayton, all the greats. And I think what you do is something that is tricky for a lot of writers, and I don't see many writers doing this, is you kind of marry the fact that you can be a spy and a special forces soldier. You know, you talk about Operation Eagle Claw. You've mentioned this in the past about, we had people on the ground in Tehran that were having to do spying, but they were also special forces trained. And it's very hard to write both, I think, in a realistic fashion.
Yeah, yeah, and we've come to see, I think, as working out of an embassy and doing that kind of spy stuff. Very very seldom do we see guys that go in under deep cover because there are so few of them. And then we forget also that, like World War II, Special Operations Executive in the OSS, yeah, they had their military side, but then they had their other people that were trained to do intelligence operations, and much of it was a mix of military and intelligence collection. So it's always been a mix, and I think it just comes across as how you tell it. You can be totally Kalashnikov about it, or you can be a little bit more subtle. And that's sort of, from my experience in Berlin, that's what I try to bring over.
Absolutely. Well, let's dig into your 5 picks. What's the first book you would ask your handler for, James?
Well, I have to tell you, Shane, you put me in a bit of a pickle because there are so many things to choose from. Fleming, Le Carre, Dayton, even McHarren. And then we have our own alumni within the group, like, you've got McCloskey, Becker, Charles Beaumont, a newcomer on the scene, but great stuff, Stephen England, Paul Vittich. So I just said, no, I'm not going to talk about any of those people. I'm going to try to pull some people out. I'm also discounting nonfiction because I don't want to take any training manuals into a restricted area. Can't compromise techniques and procedures. Spies is my first book.
Which one? Sorry, we just lost
Carnival of Spies.
Carnival of Spies. What do you remember? When your first encounter was with Carnival of Spies? When you first came across it?
My first encounter with this book was in Berlin.
Okay.
The author is Robert Moss. He's not well known. He wrote Moscow Rules also, but this is my favorite of his because it talks about Berlin. And I'm stuck on Berlin, as I told you. It's actually historical fiction. It's based on a real life, a British spy who was actually in Germany prior to World War II. And he joined the Communist Party and worked for the Communist Party in Germany until he had to leave. He was in Spain. He was in Brazil, Shanghai. This is based on the true story. But at some point, he became disillusioned with the Communist Party and was a walk-in to the British Embassy. And from that point on, reported for a very long time to the MIs that were running him, as I should say. And Moss brings the story to life. Very atmospheric. It's in Berlin. He describes the cities that he works in. Shanghai, beautifully. He goes to Brazil. Enjoyed that book. It's a story of aspects to it. There's a lot of showcasing of disillusionment with the party. Also, the duplicity of the intelligence services, primarily on the Russian side. But it's a great, and it really was one of the pushes I got that made me want to start to try to put this down on paper.
Wow, it's a very inspirational book for you. What do you think sets it apart from other spy novels, James?
Description of the deceit and the ideology involved in the conflict between the Communist Party and the rest of the world. He does an extremely good job of showcasing that, and especially the machinations of the NKVD, the predecessor of the KGB. He does it remarkably well, and it's extremely well researched.
And which character in the book do you find to be the most compelling?
That would be the lead, the protagonist, and his name is Johnny Lentz. It goes from his childhood all the way through to the end, and you're left hanging at the end because there's more to the story that could have come, but Moss did not write a sequel.
What years was Robert Moss active writing? Do you know?
I think this book was in the 1980s.
Right, because that's a good pick. I don't think he's in the Tim list, even, is he?
I don't know. It was copyrighted 1980.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I picked that up the second time I was in Berlin. Yeah, he's a good author. He's very intense.
And what timeline is the book set in? Is it set post-war, or is it that like when? What does it focus on mainly? I mean,
During prior to and during the 1930s up in the 1940s.
excellent. And if that book was to be adapted for the screen, who do you think could play the main character?
See, I'll have to discount myself.
Of course.
I think I'm not sure who. It's going to have to be a personality that's very adaptable, that has multiple faces. So, who might you think of that could play that? Not Brad Pitt in Bastards.
Right.
Forgotten the because he knows so many languages. He would be an interesting personality to play that.
Excellent. And were there any scenes or particular moments in the book that stayed with you all these years? Bearing in mind you read this a long time ago, or you discovered it a long time ago.
A series of scenes when he actually has to find and re-kidnap the love of his life, who has been kidnapped by the Russian communists in Shanghai. And the whole description of being on the moon and orchestrating this re-kidnap of the kidnapped woman is really it's a classical scene, and it's really good. He also describes his childhood very early on when he's in his home listening to his father and mother talking to other communists in Berlin in the early 80s, and it's really well done too.
Brilliant. Well, this is the danger of Dead Drop 5. I haven't read that one. My TBR pile is huge, as you can imagine, but I'm going to have to
yeah.
That's the first one I'll be ordering after we've put this episode out, and I know there'll be a lot of Spybrarians joining me. So thank you for your first pick. What would your second pick be, James?
These are in no particular order. So Arman and Havana, Graham Greene.
Yeah. What is it about that book you enjoy so much?
It reminds me a lot of when I was working for the agency of having to come up with intelligence reports to fill requirements. Although I never recruited a vacuum cleaner salesman, I might have come close. And one of the reports that he sends in about a vacuum cleaner that is supposed to be some kind of a secret weapon reminded me of an April Fool's Day report I sent in once when I was in Africa about how this particular country had acquired Japanese technology to make the B-1 bomber, and they were going to be using it against the country next to them. Luckily, the date on it was April 1st, and they recognized it for what it was. So,
excellent.
Anyway, Graham Greene, he really infuses some of the futility of espionage, questioning its morality on both sides, both the British and the American and the Russian side. And a lot of interesting things in there. He's questioning Catholicism. He's talking a lot about alcohol. And his protagonist, the vacuum cleaner salesman, Jim Wormbold, he's being bullied by everybody in the entire story. His daughter, his ex-wife, agent handler, and of course the people on the other side. It's a fun book, but it's got a really good story to tell.
Absolutely. As a writer, how does Graham Greene inspire you? Because I know there's quite a few writers in our community, I.S. Berry, Paul Vidic, who really, and Le Carre himself looked up to Greene. What is it about his writing that you enjoy so much?
I have the Penguin version, which is a reprint. But, I think it's just his ability to infuse his characters with personality traits that don't generally see. These are very vulnerable people, all of them, and in one manner or another. They might come across as a badass, but in reality, they're not. And then his underlying messages in there. He was, I think, deeply convicted. He was a friend of Philby. Get it straight with the good side. Now, of course, we all think we're the good side, but he had serious questions about it. And I think that was partly because of his time in Africa, which is another reason I like him, is because I've also spent a lot of time in Africa. And his commentaries on the conflicts in Africa are also very good to read. So, nonfiction.
Yeah, absolutely. Of all the characters in Our Man in Havana, who would you most like to go and have a few drinks with?
None of
We might say that in all the spy books we enjoy, right?
no, I wouldn't. I can't remember her name, but maybe the secretary that knows he's a real
Yeah.
and keeps supporting him no matter what. But I have no affinity for the handler. I have less affinity for Warmold himself. And of course, the Cubans are all very bad people, of course,
It's
mostly.
interesting. It's interesting you say that because, when I meet Spybrarians and I'm out and about, I often hear, spy fans saying, well, I didn't like that book because I didn't like the protagonist or I didn't like any of the characters. And I'm hearing you saying, well, you don't have to have an affinity with the characters if it's a good story and they're believable characters with a good plot and location.
Well, yeah. I mean, you go to, this just popped into my head, Le Carre's Night Manager. The protagonist goes through all these machinations as part of his tasking to get to the bad guy. And the bad guy, as he's played in the movie, I really enjoy because he's just such a bad person. So
Yeah.
he's fun. Anyway,
I think that's what most actors say, right? They always prefer to play the villain than the straight lead because it's more fun to be the villain, right?
definitely.
Excellent. What would be your third pick, James?
The third pick, although I can only take one of them with me, would be the series by Charles McCary, the Paul Christopher series.
Yes.
And the one, there were so many I liked, but the one I chose to take with me is called Second Sight. I think it's number 7 or 8 in the series of 10 books. And I just find McCary's writing, the sweep of his storyline is so broad and so interesting. And he always is pulling in historical aspects that are true and then infusing them with fiction. And he does that particularly well in Second Sight when he talks about Paul Christopher's mother, who is kidnapped by Reinhard Heydrich, the German Reichsprotector of Czechoslovakia. And that subtext is in there. And he always brings these mulligans, or what did Alfred Hitchcock call them? These small bits of information in to confuse the story. He does it really well in this one. And I enjoy the entire McCary's his entire scope of writing, but the Paul Christopher series is very good. And I think he's a very underrated or very unknown American writer. And it should be right up there at the top. He also is a former intelligence officer. He worked under non-official cover overseas, and it shows writing. His ability to depict tradecraft is excellent. He also is very good at showing the motivations of everybody involved, whether it's the recruiter or the spy himself or perhaps the opposition. And it's I find him a great writer.
And with regards to the Paul Christopher series, for our listeners, for those among us who haven't read any, could you just pick up Second Sight and enjoy it as a standalone, or do you recommend starting at the very beginning?
Starting at the very beginning. And I would have to consult my Charles McCary reading list to tell you which one to start with. The Mirnick dossier?
Yes. And it sounds like they're set in global locations.
Very much so. He likes to go to Central Asia, spend a lot of time in China, a lot of other places, but definitely Asia. He knows Asia.
Yeah. I mean, I hear a lot of authors and indeed readers in the Spybrary communities, lauding his work. Why do you think he's unknown today or not as well known?
Movie?
Yeah.
No one made a movie. Yeah. I don't know why. I think perhaps the scope of his novels were too big to be picked up or anything like that. I don't know why he never got really picked up by the populace. Today it's difficult. not to get noticed, either for good or for bad. He just seemed to have fled under the limelight for the whole time. Although he was well reviewed in New York Times
Yes.
and Washington Post, and I think even in the UK to some extent,
Yeah.
just not very good on promotion.
I think that's a good point, actually, James. It is about legacy and managing that legacy. We read in the paper recently, even the John le Carre estate, are looking at that, and with their archive that they've now donated to Oxford, etc. And I think the worry, I think even he wrote in his will that make sure people keep reading my books, and there has to be that effort. And you also see it with Len Deighton. You might see Berlin Game in a bookshop, but very little in the US for sure, very little. And even in the UK, it's only with the Penguin versions that came out recently why you see it. So the estates have to work really hard to keep the author's name in the public eye.
Definitely, and I don't think there's anybody to do that for McGarry either. He
Yeah.
was published by a fairly small press at the time, and that may have had to do something with it. Not sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, if you look at the Clancy estate, with the continuation writers, and again, there's movies behind that as well, isn't there, James? But, they've done a good job, whether you like them or not, of keeping Clancy in the public eye.
Well, let's mention Ian Fleming then, too. I mean, once John F. Kennedy held up a copy of whatever book he was reading at the time, Casino Royale, I think, it was off the charts for him. So that's all. Oprah Winfrey, yeah, I have to send her my book. Yeah.
She listens to Spybrary. She'll be hassling you for a copy. Don't you worry.
Okay, yeah, we're right on it.
Yeah. Let's go to book 4. What's the 4th book you would like to request?
This is a foreign book, HH.
HHHH. Okay, I'm intrigued.
On the title, it says it's got 4 H's, and it's by Laurent Benet, a French author. It's been translated into English. The book title, HHH, means basically translated from the German, Hitler's brain is called Heydrich. Heydrich is the Reichsminister that was so-called blonde, the blonde executioner. I can't think of his right name now. The Reichsprotector of Czechoslovakia. He was subordinate to Himmler, but one of the most powerful German officers in the regime and the SS. He was one of the principal authors of the Final Solution. Just not a very nice people. And this book, Ancient, the assassination of Heydrich in Prague. Strictly spy, but it is spy because it was orchestrated by the British SOE. And the author goes at this sort of like a journalist. He describes how he discovered the story and then goes into it as if he's a journalist writing the story and then doing a simulcast of the action at the same time. So you see him struggling to find the story, to find the information behind it, and at the same time, you begin to see the training of the 2 Czechs that were parachuted into Czechoslovakia and how they organize and how they get to Heydrich and actually kill him. And then after that, how they escape and are eventually run down by the Germans in the basement of a church at Prague, and that's where they're killed. So the whole story is a reconstruction, but he rebuilds the narrative of the Czechs talking to each other, all the people that are working in it. But you also hear his voice at the same time as he's narrating what's happening, how he's finding things out. So it's a very unique perspective, and it's extremely well done. And I've read a lot on the Heydrich assassination, and this is one of the most entertaining historical fiction books I've read. And it's specifically entertaining because of this unique perspective that he brings into it.
And does it feel realistic to you, having read the history of this? And obviously, this
very much so. I mean, he recounts the history almost exactly. It's only the voices that he's bringing up that he's producing himself.
Yeah.
So those are all speculative, but it's really well done.
So with it being a foreign book, how did you come across it?
My elder brother said, you might like this.
Great. Family recommendation.
And I have 2 brothers. My middle brother is a former FBI agent, and he's somewhat right. Well, he used to be somewhat right of Genghis Khan. My older brother is an artist, a sculptor, and well, back in the day, he listened to Bob Dylan and all those people, and he was what you might call a beat. So, but he knows me well anyway, and he said, "You'll enjoy this," and I did.
Let's move on to your fifth pick. So it's your fifth and final pick with your handler to keep you entertained behind the wall.
Okay,
What are you going
okay,
for?
Mr. Handler, sympathizer.
Okay. So what is it about this book that you enjoy so much?
This is by an Vietnamese American writer, Hit Ton Nguyen. The protagonist is half Vietnamese, half French, which is basically the sign that he has conflicted ideologies. And the whole book is very much about those conflictions. Stranger in a strange land. Starts out, he's working for the Vietnamese army, he's a captain. He's actually a spy for the North Vietnamese. Escapes to the United States with the general that he was working for. But he escapes to the United States specifically because he's supposed to report on this general while he was in the United States. And then he ends up here in the United States in California, and it's a showcase of the American dream versus his Asian background, his Asian reality. It's also a confliction between the former regime of South Vietnam as well as the new communist masters coming out of Hanoi. And it's comedic, but it's also a really good description of how the Americans do not understand or did not understand the Vietnamese conflict in any way, shape, or form. And he does an extremely good job of that. Because he has to do things he doesn't want to, follow people he doesn't want to. At one point, he has to kill a Vietnamese, a former officer. The description of that is just off the chart funny, I guess.
Yeah.
If you can make a murder funny, he does a good job of it. Ends up coming back to Vietnam, and he's put into a re-education camp by the communists. Because once you go outside of Vietnam, you're suspected of being a traitor.
Yes.
So he goes through this. The last half of the book, he goes through his re-education until he reaches the point of enlightenment, and they're ready to release him. So it's just a magnificent book. Point of view, of course, is totally different from any American book on Vietnam, and
In which
so
way?
I can recommend that. He just doesn't see things the same way as we do. Yeah, I mean, he looks at a movie, he comments on the things that he thinks Americans like, the women, the scantily clad women, and then his idea of what he thinks is interesting about the movie. It goes back and forth with that, and he talks about the American culture in California very derisively, but then at the same time, he wants everything that everybody else has. So
Yeah.
he's just totally conflicted.
Like you, I'm kind of attracted to those books where it is a different viewpoint, right? Because we're so used to the Western protagonists, the Brits and the Americans are the good guys, the Soviets are the villains, the evil. It is good to read books with a different perspective.
He has written a sequel to it, but I have not read it yet. It's another on my TBR pile. I'm looking forward to that.
And was there a movie or TV series made of it? I saw it somewhere.
You reminded me. I think with Robert Downey Jr.
Right. Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, Robert Downey Jr. plays the American CIA agent that's involved in it, and he does it really well, from what I've heard. I have not seen it.
I might have. I'll have to read the book first. I'm a stickler like that, and then might put that on the list of.
I still have to catch up on the Bureau and the Agency and all those other series as well.
And for you as a writer in this genre, it must be very encouraging when you see so many spy TV series coming out that people are hungry for this stuff, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I was baptized with military war stories because my father was in the military, and so we used to go to the Longest Day and all those movies when I was a kid. And then, of course, when the James Bond movies started coming out, not to mention the Hitchcock films, North by Northwest and everything else. As soon as I saw those, so I really started to read espionage books. And that's also where I started to get my cross training to go into special force as a kid. Anyway, another movie. Well, we're not talking about movies yet, but
Well,
I'll leave
let
that
me
one
ask
for
you
later.
this. Let me ask. I'm always intrigued by this. Were there any spy movies, espionage movies, James, that you and your colleagues enjoy because it's realistic, or
Some that were realistic and
yeah,
some that were not. The Condor.
yeah,
There's the book, 6 Days of the Condor, but that movie was really good. Bond movies and some of the later ones, not so much the middle ones. Thunderbolt, and there you've got the combination of paramilitary intelligence work. Well, James Bond was never a spy. He was basically what does that SIS call their section? The 00 section,
yeah,
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 whatever they did.
yeah, yeah. Great movie.
So he kind of commando intelligence mix. And of course, you can't beat Richard Burton and Clint working together.
You know, I just read the book over Christmas actually because I'd never read. I've watched the movie a billion times, but I love it. And I read the book, and you know, online there was quite a few poor reviews about the book, and I thought, oh, okay, but I actually really enjoyed it. It went a little deeper with some of the actions and the thoughts of the characters, and obviously, you know what's coming up because it's he basically wrote the screenplay and the novel at the same time, right? So there's no, even though there was no surprises, it was still a really thrilling read. I enjoyed it.
Yeah. There's only so many movies that I can go back to and watch second or third time, and that is one of them.
Yeah,
I have to admit.
absolutely. It's
That's
always
Thunderbolt. Yeah.
Where He Goes There is always on TV in the UK at Christmas time. It's almost a Christmas movie where people watch that
Almost.
one. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Uh,
you got a lot of snow, and I think there was a Christmas tree in one
yeah,
scene. Whatever.
absolutely. But they always show it on British TV. So there's a couple of other things you can ask your handler for now, because we want to make sure we set you up for success in East Berlin. You can ask for a spy gadget. Now, that can be fictional or from the real world. What would you like, James?
What do you consider a gadget? I guess anything that does something that's really weird. I have to go back to and I can't think of any one particular gadget that I would absolutely have to have or love to have. How about Harry Potter's cloak of invisibility?
That's a first. Yeah, that'd be coming quite handy, right? I
That
mean,
would come in.
Bond had an invisible car in one of the in one of the movies, right? So I mean,
Well, they are working on cloth that will disappear, but we'll see how that goes. Failing that, I think it would be more of a technical thing, a technical support thing, and that's to have an airtight cover.
yeah, yeah.
A cover for action, a cover for status, one that nobody will ever question. And that's pretty rare.
I was gonna say,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, sometimes I think they do. It's the kind of thing that where you're interrogated by a police officer or a security officer, and when you're finished, they walk away going, "Am I talking to the right guy?"
yeah,
He's
yeah,
he's not who we're looking at. This is not the spy you're looking for. That's how they should come away.
yeah. I got it. What about a spy character that you can recruit? So you've been blown, right? So your cover's been blown. You got to get out. You can call anyone up from the real world or fictional. Who you calling on, James?
Well, luckily you gave me a hint this might come up, so I did some thinking about it. And at first I was going to say, well, Jason Bourne, because Jason Bourne can do everything. And then I said, wait a minute. So far, what I've seen is every person that works with Jason Bourne gets whacked. So he ends up getting out himself, and everybody else is dead. So definitely not him. Two people. It would either be Felix Leiter, because in his case, he gets killed and James Bond gets away. And I would consider myself the James Bond. Or maybe Clint Eastwood's character in From Where Eagles Dare,
Oh, Schaefer.
Lieutenant Shepard.
Yeah,
Because he's the man with a mission there.
yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. We're allowed to get you a bottle of booze. What's your favorite tipple, James?
A fine scotch. And I would go with a Talisker 18. Talisker 45 is too expensive to risk on the parachute drop.
Got it. What about you could take one spy movie with you to watch?
Day of the Jackal.
Good choice. What do you like so much about that one?
The methodical precision that he goes through to prepare the mission. I mean, it's a case study in tradecraft and preparation.
Yeah, it really is. Have you watched the new TV adaptation?
No, I had not. Who was the actor or the young man?
Eddie Redmayne.
I've heard it was good, but I was kind of scared off it by the Bruce Willis remake that was horrible.
Oh, don't start. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I was put off a little bit by some of the comments in Spybrary. And it's funny, because at Christmas time, chatting to friends and family, they were all raving about it. So it's funny, you speak to, should we say, the civilians, non-Spybarians, who maybe have never read the book or watched the original movie. They were like, oh, it was a great show. And then some of our Spybarians who are steeped in this stuff, I'm like, well, it wasn't like the movie, and it wasn't like the book. And it's like, yeah, okay, but it's, the masses enjoy it. So
Well, it's like right now I'm seeing a lot of traffic on LinkedIn and Twitter and some even on Facebook about Patty May,
yes.
the SAS officer, and the possibility of him being reconsidered for the Victoria Cross. And one of the main supporters of him getting the Victoria Cross is the author of The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, Damian Lewis.
Yes.
And people are saying this guy was not fit to get the VC, and people are pushing back from Damian Lewis specifically because of his portrayal, not his portrayal, the movie portrayal of the SOE guys in Ministry of Unholy Warfare. And if you read the book, it's one thing. If you see the movie, it's a completely different. The movie was atrocious.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, whatever.
Okay, what about a record, CD, piece of music, a song? Is there something that would lift your spirits so that you would enjoy listening to behind the wall?
I'm going to cheat. I would take a playlist that would mix artists like Segovia and the Traveling Wilburys and maybe Santana.
Yeah.
Something, a lot of guitar lick.
I'm sure Eric Honecker likes those as well, right? Bopping along to Santana.
Actually a special section in the Stasi archives about how they were trying to suppress counterculture music, anything that came over from the West. And it's really amusing to see it now.
Well, I have to ask you, for those of you who are watching this on YouTube, behind you, you have what I think is the Stasi crest, right? Is it the Stasi shield behind you?
It is, yeah. It's what the Germans call messing, which is bronze, sort of a brass amalgam. And that shield hung in the entry foyer of house number 1
Wow.
at Normannenstrasse.
That actual one on the wall is the actual one from house number 1. Wow.
And I only know that because
You pinched it off the wall in 89.
actually it was 90, but you said it. I just.
Oh, that's cool. That's such a lovely item to have. As you, I think we talked about before, I have a whole collection of GDR stuff that I've been collecting down the years, and it's just.
I have told my wife that when I'm finished with it, it can go to the International Spy Museum downtown.
Yeah, absolutely. They would love that, and I think that's a great place for it to be exhibited. Okay, what about a luxury item? Is there anything at all that would make life a little easier for you and ensconced in East Berlin?
I'm not. Well, it's got to count as a luxury item. Well, they're taking credit cards these days in East Berlin.
Just about.
So what I would like is an unrestricted credit card, one that every time you used it, the attributes would change, so no one would ever know where that card was used or who used it.
Yeah.
Just that it would pay the bill. And so then I could buy anything I needed.
Fantastic.
Or use an ATM machine.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up our conversation today, who would you like to hear next on Dead Drop 5? Whose book selections would you like to hear more about?
Michael Frost Beckner, whom I'm a great fan of.
Absolutely. No, that would be a good pick. Well, what are you working on at the moment? You have a new book coming out in the Snake Eater Chronicles, I believe. Ratcatcher in Berlin?
The Ratcatcher of Berlin.
The Ratcatcher of Berlin.
It's the sort of the origin novel. It takes place in about 1957. It kind of got its genesis in a story I was told by one of our old members of the unit. It involves a CIA officer and a special forces soldier in Berlin, 1957, 1958. trying to solve the murder of an American counterintelligence officer inside East Berlin. And it ends up leading to a possible traitor within the American establishment in West Berlin. So it's semi-crime procedural, but then it's based in espionage and special operations and has its basis in a true story.
How many books are there now in the Snake Eater Chronicles?
When this one gets published, 5.
5. Okay. And for people new to your work, do you recommend they start with the question of time and work their way through, or can they go out and get Ratcatcher of Berlin when that's available?
They could start with Ratcatcher or the question of time. They're pretty independent.
Yeah, absolutely. Standalones. That's great. You also have a non-fiction book coming out later this year, correct?
They do in June, hopefully. Ratcatcher should be out in April from Doubleday, Canadian. I'm really psyched to see how this is going to turn out, but it's going to be a spy's guide to Cold War Berlin.
Superb.
In words and image. So we shall see how this turns out. But we're on track to get it out in June.
Well, I'll be first in line for that with my obsession of everything Berlin Cold War and love Berlin as a city. I always love an excuse to get out there, and a bit like you, James, I imagine, I get away from, Friedrichstrasse and all the tourist hotspots. I go to Friedrichsfelde and other places and just wander around. And I know that there's, even myself as a keen student of Berlin history, I know there's so much more. And with your background and what you did in Special Forces Berlin, I'd love to go to some of the places that you hung out and to learn more about those as well. I'm very excited for that.
Well, I'll give you a hint. There's a restaurant right near Friedrichstrasse Bahn that is in real life and in fiction very important. Right on the river, where you can sit outside and look at Friedrichstrasse Bahnhof. But it was a place that we went to. It was a place that Len Dayton went to. And it's a place that was a hangout probably during the Cold War.
Is that the Ganymede?
That's it.
Yeah. I've never eaten in there, actually.
It's a great restaurant.
Is it? Because that's where the head of the, the SED, the East German Communist Party, the Politburo, they would all eat in there. And
the diplomats and all the people that would go see Bertolt Brecht next door.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And it was in Joe Cannon's book as well, Berlin Exchange, I believe. I think it featured in...
I believe so.
Yeah.
Definitely in Dayton.
And you just think of all these people walking past it, no idea of, the history of the place.
Well, we'll see if we can change.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'd love to invite you back on when the book is published, and we have a lot of our listeners are interested in going to museums and tours around the world. I mean, my inbox is always guaranteed every week a couple of messages. I'm in London, what can I visit? I'm in Berlin, what can I visit? So it'd be great to have you, so I can direct people across to your work on Berlin.
Yeah, there's so many nice fun places to see in Berlin.
Yeah, and what I love about Berlin is they trust us as adults, where you can go buy a beer for like €2 or whatever in a shop, and you can walk down the road in the Berlin sun and actually enjoy your beer as you're walking from A to B and not get arrested.
Yeah, there were times though.
Yeah.
I could tell you some stories, but I won't belabor the point.
But I mean now, like, you can walk down the road with a beer bottle. And the other thing is the Germans don't look at you as if you're an alcoholic or a writer. They just, he's having his beer and enjoying his walk. I love that about Berlin.
The first time I went to Berlin was in the 70s, and you did not drink water at a restaurant because they did not trust the water. Yeah. So you were drinking beer or Coca-Cola. That was it.
Yeah. So before we wrap up, I just wanted to share with our listeners, especially those of you who are around the DC area, we are looking at hosting a meetup. We're going to work on the date, the final week of February. It's just, come along, have beers. A couple of people who said they'll come along is I.S. Berry, Dan Fesperman, Adam Brooks, Simon Conway. So a lot of authors are coming along. If you'd like to meet them along with James in DC, please do. It'd be great to see you there. If you go to spybrary.com/community, we'll be posting all the details in there. Or if you're not on social media, email me at shane@spybrary.com and I can let you know the dates and times and locations. But excited to finally meet you in the flesh, James.
Yeah. We've tried, but it hasn't come off. So this will be the reserve contact.
Well, to be honest with you, a trip to DC is long overdue. I've not even been to the Spy Museum since it moved the location, which is, with COVID and everything else that happened. I've not got down there. So long overdue a visit.
Well, the old one was nice, but this one is fantastic, and the building was built specifically for this museum. So you'll see it when you get there.
Excellent. James, where can people find out more about your work?
Well, I am on Facebook, sort of. I've got a website that's James Stejskal Writer. If you Google my name, James Stejskal, you can find it, or you will also find my niece and my brother who have also written books. So,
Yeah.
But, I'm on Amazon.
Right. I'll add
and
all
Barnes
those.
Noble.
Yeah. I'll add all those links to our show notes, so you can go and find those at spybrary.com/256. If you enjoyed today's conversation and you're watching this on YouTube, please drop us a like. Please, even more important is to hit the subscribe button, because we're producing a lot more of Dead Drop 5s. In our Spybrary survey last year, you all said you want more of these, and I know why, because you've already got 4 books here that I need to go and buy as a result of the conversation with James. And who doesn't want to discover classic quality spy novels? James, thanks a million for coming on to Spybrary, and I'm excited to see you in a couple of weeks' time.
Well, I hope so. And I have to say, Shane, that Spy Library is the place to be if you want to read about espionage.
It is. It's also the place to be if you want to get broke, because I've never owned so many books in my life. But, it's the worst things to spend money on than good books, right, James?
It just makes it fun.
It does. Thank you.
Okay. Take care, Shane.